10 years ago, this village threw her out like she was nothing. They called her a thief, a disgrace. They watched her walk away, with nothing but tears in her eyes and a mother's blessing on her lips. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the girl they had destroyed would one day return to save them all. And today, standing in the middle of that same village, she is not the girl they remember. She is the queen they never saw coming.
In a small village in the heart of Ghana, where the Harmattan wind carried red dust through every compound and the evenings smelled of wood smoke and boiling cassava, two sisters grew up under the same roof, Adwoa and Efia, sisters by blood, but strangers in spirit. Adwoa was the kind of girl the whole village adored. She woke before the rooster's first crow to fetch water from the stream, balancing the clay pot on her head with the grace of someone twice her age. She helped the elderly sweep their compounds without being asked. She never once passed a crying child without kneeling down to wipe their tears. Her kindness was not a performance. It was simply who she was, woven into her like thread into cloth. Efia was different. Where Adwoa gave, Efia watched. Where Adwoa smiled, Efia calculated. And where the village showered Adwoa with praise, something inside Efia curled tighter and darker year after year, like a vine strangling a tree from the inside out. It was not that Efia lacked opportunity. She had the same two hands, the same strong legs, the same hours in the day. She could have fetched water, too. She could have sat with the elderly. She could have chosen kindness. But somewhere along the way, Efia chose bitterness instead. And bitterness, left to grow in silence, becomes something far more dangerous than sadness. It becomes hunger. Their mother, Ma Akua, was a widow who raised both girls alone after their father died in a farming accident when Efia was 6 and Adwoa was 4. She was a wise woman, the kind whose words people repeated long after she had spoken them. She used to sit the girls down under the mango tree in the evenings and say, "The world will try to dim your light, my children, but never stop shining." A candle does not lose anything by lighting another candle. She meant it as a lesson for both of them. But for Efia, those words became something else entirely. Every time she heard her mother praise Adwoa's light, she felt her own flame flicker smaller. Every kind word spoken about her sister was a blade sliding quietly between her ribs. And on one particular evening, the evening Ma Akua gifted Adwoa her own grandmother's beaded necklace because she had earned it with her heart, something inside Efia broke completely. She made a silent, private vow that night, lying awake on her mat while her sister slept peacefully beside her. She promised to destroy everything her sister had ever loved. She did not know yet how. But the seed was planted. And seeds, given enough dark and enough time, always find a way to grow. Nobody becomes a villain overnight. It happens in small moments, one resentment at a time, until the person looking back at you in the mirror is someone you no longer recognize. Efia would sit in the corner of the compound, arms wrapped around her knees, watching her sister work. She watched Adwoa carry firewood for Auntie Serwa, whose hip had grown too weak for such labor. She watched Adwoa share her own portion of banku with a hungry neighbor's child without a second thought. She watched the village elders nod approvingly whenever Adwoa passed, murmuring about what a heart she had. And every single time, Efia asked herself the same aching question. Why does everyone love her? What does she have that I do not? The truth Efia refused to accept was that Adwoa had nothing Efia did not also possess. Not more beauty, not more intelligence, not more luck. The only difference between them was a choice, made 1,000 times over, in 1,000 small moments. Adwoa chose to give, and Efia chose to guard. But admitting that would have meant admitting fault. And it is always easier to hate the mirror than to look into it. So Efia built herself a new truth, brick by brick, lie by lie. She told herself that Adwoa was not really kind, that she only helped people so they would love her, that she was not a saint but a performer. She knew, somewhere deep down, that these were lies. But she repeated them to herself so often, in the dark, on her mat, staring at the thatched roof, that eventually the lies stopped feeling like lies at all. They felt like truth. And once a person believes their own poison, there is no reasoning with them anymore. There was one more wound, one Efia carried more quietly than the rest. His name was Kwame, the blacksmith's son, tall and steady-handed, with a laugh that carried across the market square. Efia had loved him since they were children, had imagined a whole life beside him without ever telling a soul. But Kwame had eyes only for Adwoa, not because Adwoa sought his attention, but because kindness, real kindness, has its own quiet gravity. People are drawn to it the way plants lean toward the sun. When Kwame finally gathered the courage to ask Adwoa's mother for permission to court her daughter, Efia stood behind the kitchen wall, listening, her fingernails cutting crescents into her own palms. That night, her vow hardened into something with teeth. The sacred jewels of Nana Yeboah's shrine had belonged to the village for 4 generations. They were more than gold. They were the village's memory, its pride, its connection to the ancestors. To touch them without permission was considered one of the gravest sins a person could commit. Efia knew this, and she knew exactly how to use it. On a quiet evening, while the sky bled orange over the hills, Efia walked alone to the home of Nana Yeboah, the most respected elder in the village. She had rehearsed her tears in the reflection of the water pot that morning, practicing until they came on command. She told him that her sister Adwoa had taken the sacred jewels from the shrine, that she had seen it with her own eyes, and that Adwoa had threatened her. Nana Yeboah was a wise man who had settled countless disputes in his long life. But wisdom is not immunity to a well-told lie, especially one delivered with such convincing sorrow. By morning, the entire village had heard. A meeting was called beneath the great baobab tree at the center of the village, the same tree where weddings were blessed and disputes were settled, where children were named, and where, that day, a young woman's life would be torn apart. Adwoa stood in the middle of the gathered crowd, confused, her hands trembling at her sides. She had done nothing wrong, and so she could not understand the accusing eyes now fixed upon her. Behind her, hidden just enough that no one would notice, Efia allowed herself the smallest, coldest smile. She cried out that Adwoa had brought shame to the village, that she was a disgrace to their family, to their ancestors, to everything they stood for. Adwoa turned, searching the crowd for her mother's face, hoping that someone would step forward and defend her. Ma'akua tried. She pushed through the crowd, her voice breaking, begging them to believe that her daughter was innocent. But grief has no power against a village already convinced of its verdict. The crowd had made its decision before the sun had even fully risen, and no mother's plea, however desperate, could undo it. Nana Yeboah raised his weathered hand, and silence fell like a curtain. He declared that Adwoa had shamed the village and that she must leave, that she would never set foot on this land again. The crowd erupted, some in anger, some in sorrow, most in the particular kind of excited whisper that gathers whenever tragedy becomes entertainment. Not one voice rose in Adwoa's defense. Not one hand reached to stop what was happening. Adwoa turned to her sister one final time, her eyes searching Efia's face for any flicker of guilt, any sign of the girl she had grown up beside, had shared a mat with, had loved without condition. She whispered, asking Efia why she was doing this. For one fragile moment, something shifted behind Efia's eyes, a flicker of the child she used to be, before jealousy hollowed her out. But the moment passed as quickly as it came. She looked away. It was too late to turn back now. She had lit the fire, and fires, once lit, do not ask permission before they spread. Adwoa walked out of the village with nothing but the cloth on her back and the sound of her mother's sobbing fading behind her. She walked for hours under the punishing sun, her sandals wearing thin against the red earth, her throat raw from thirst and unshed tears. Every step away from home felt like tearing a piece of herself loose and leaving it behind on the road. She did not look back. She could not. She knew that if she turned around, she would see her mother collapsed in the dust. She would see Ephias's face devoid of remorse, and the sight would break whatever was left holding her together. The only thing keeping her moving forward was a single sentence, whispered into her ear as she was pushed from the village gates, her mother's final blessing, delivered through tears. She told her to stay alive and that God had a plan for her that the village could not see. She did not know, In that moment, how many nights she would repeat those words to herself just to keep breathing. By the third day, Adwoa reached the outskirts of the city, a place louder and colder than anything she had ever imagined. Cars roared past her instead of goats. Strangers rushed by without a single glance, each one wrapped in their own private urgency. For a girl raised on warmth and community, the city felt like a desert of glass and noise. She had no money, no shelter, no one who knew her name. She slept the first few nights beneath the overhang of a closed shop, curling herself small against the cold, waking each morning with dust in her hair and hunger gnawing at her stomach. She began asking, door to door, stall to stall, for any work at all, sweeping, washing, carrying, anything that would earn her a meal. Most doors closed in her face before she finished speaking. But on the seventh day, exhausted and nearly ready to give up hope entirely, she stopped in front of a small roadside restaurant, its walls painted a fading yellow, the smell of jollof rice drifting into the street. Behind the counter stood a sharp-eyed woman named Amma, arms crossed, watching Adwoa with the particular scrutiny of someone who had survived hard times herself and could recognize the look on another survivor's face. She told Adwoa that she looked like someone who had been thrown away. Adwoa did not deny it. She had no strength left to pretend otherwise. She told Amma that she could work and that she did not need to be paid. She just wanted to work for food. Amma studied her for a long moment, the way one studies a stray dog, deciding whether it can be trusted near the children. Then she nodded once, sharply. She told Adwoa that she would not pay her at first, but she would feed her and teach her, and what she did with that was up to her. Adwoa did not know it yet, but she had just found the second mother of her life. Adwoa worked like a woman possessed, not out of desperation alone, but out of a fierce, quiet determination to prove that the village's judgment of her had been wrong. She woke before Amma every morning to sweep the restaurant floor. She stayed long after the last customer left, scrubbing pots until her hands bled and cracked. She never once complained, never once asked for more than what was given. And Amma, watching closely, began to see something rare in the girl. Not just hard work, but a mind hungry to learn. She began teaching Adwoa everything she knew. How to read a ledger, how to negotiate with suppliers who tried to cheat a woman running her own business, how to calculate profit margins on scraps of paper by candlelight. Most importantly, she taught her the one lesson that would define the rest of Adwoa's life. She told her to trust her own hands before she trusted anyone else's promises, that people would smile at her and still stab her in the back, but her work would never betray her. Adwoa absorbed every lesson like dry earth soaking up the first rain of the season. Within a year, she could manage the restaurant's entire accounts herself. Within 2 years, customers were asking for her by name, drawn by her warmth as much as her efficiency. Within 3 years, Amma had begun quietly stepping back, letting Adwoa run the daily operations while she rested her aging bones. Then, in the 5th year, Amma fell ill. It was a slow illness, one that stole her strength a little each week. And where a daughter might have been expected to nurse her, it was Adwoa, a girl who had no blood tie to this woman at all, who stayed by her bedside every night. She spooned soup into Amma's mouth when her hands shook too badly to hold the bowl herself. She sang the same lullabies her own mother once sang to her, hoping the melody might ease Amma's pain, the way it once eased her own childhood fears. She never once considered leaving, even when there was no money left to pay for medicine, even when the restaurant's income dropped without Amma's steady hand. On the last evening of her life, Amma called Adwoa to her bedside, her voice barely above a whisper. She told Adwoa that the restaurant was hers now and pressed a small worn key into her palm. She said that she had earned it, not with blood, not with money, but with loyalty, the rarest currency in this world. Adwoa held her hand through the night, and by morning, Amma was gone. Grief hit Adwoa harder than she expected. She had lost her mother once already, in a way, when the village cast her out, and now she had lost the woman who had become a mother to her in exile. But grief, she had learned, does not have to be the end of a story. Sometimes it is simply the soil from which something new must grow. She buried Amma with the dignity of a queen, and then she went back to work. What Adwoa built over the following 5 years would become legend in the city. though few knew the girl behind it had once been cast out of her own village for a crime she never committed. She expanded the small yellow restaurant into 3 locations, then 5, then a dozen, each one carrying Amma's original recipes alongside Adwoa's own innovations. She built a reputation not just for exceptional food, but for exceptional fairness. She paid her staff generously, trained young women from difficult backgrounds just as Amma had trained her, and refused every opportunity to cut corners at someone else's expense. Word of her success spread. Investors sought her out. Journalists wrote about the self-made restaurateur who built an empire from nothing. She appeared on the radio, then on television, always deflecting praise back toward the woman who had given her a chance when no one else would. But beneath the tailored dresses and the gold jewelry, beneath the confident voice that now commanded boardrooms full of men twice her age, Adwoa carried the same ache she had carried since the day she left her village. She thought of her mother constantly, wondering if she was still alive, still healthy, still waiting by the roadside every evening the way she used to wait for Adwoa to return from the stream. She thought less often of Efia, not because the wound had healed, but because some wounds are easier to survive if you stop touching them. Still, every year on the anniversary of her banishment, Adwoa would sit alone in her office long after everyone had gone home, and she would ask herself the same question. Did they ever regret it? She did not know. But after 10 long years, she decided it was finally time to find out. The car kicked up the same red dust that had once coated Adwoa's bare feet as she walked away in shame. Now, that same road carried her back in a vehicle polished to a mirror shine, dressed in a gown of deep purple kente, gold bangles catching the afternoon light with every movement of her wrist. She had told her driver to stop at the edge of the village. She wanted to walk the final stretch on her own feet, the way she had walked out. People stopped mid-motion as she passed. A woman balancing firewood on her head nearly dropped it in shock. Children who had never known her stared at the stranger in fine clothing, sensing without understanding that something significant was unfolding. Word spread through the village faster than fire through dry grass. She had returned. The girl they cast out had returned. Nana Yeboah, now bent with age, his once commanding voice reduced to a frail rasp, shuffled forward from his hut, squinting against the sun to make sense of the figure approaching. He whispered her name in disbelief. She stopped before him, meeting his eyes without anger, without the trembling fear of the girl who had once stood accused beneath the baobab tree. She told him that she was back, not for revenge, not for justice, but to see the people she once called family and to see if this village ever learned the truth. A ripple of shame moved through the gathering crowd. Many lowered their eyes, unable to hold her gaze. Some had children now who had grown up hearing whispered stories of the sister who was banished, never knowing the full truth of what had truly happened that day. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a figure stepped forward, smaller than Adwoa remembered, her back slightly stooped, her once proud face lined with years of something that looked very much like regret. Efia. The village fell silent as the two sisters stood face to face for the first time in a decade. Efia's hands trembled at her sides. Whatever confidence had once fueled her lies had long since been eaten away by 10 years of guilt. She had never found the courage to confess aloud, not to their mother, not to the elders, not even to herself in the privacy of her own thoughts. She whispered that she knew she did not deserve to even speak her name. But she asked to be allowed to say that she had lied, that there were no stolen jewels, that she had told Nana Yeboah a story invented out of jealousy, out of hatred she could not control. She said she had destroyed her sister's life because she could not stand to watch her shine while she stayed in the shadows. She said she was so sorry. She had carried that shame every single day for 10 years, and it had eaten her alive. The crowd gasped audibly, many hearing the full truth for the very first time. Whispers spread instantly through the gathering, disbelief turning quickly to outrage on Adwoa's behalf. Adwoa said nothing at first. She simply looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw not the cruel girl who had stood behind the crowd with a hidden smile, but a woman who had spent a decade drowning in the consequences of a single, unforgivable choice. She told Efia that she had spent the first 2 years crying every single night, lying awake in a stranger's city, wondering what she had done to deserve losing everything: her home, her mother, her sister, and her name. She asked Efia why she had hated her so much. She paused, letting the silence stretch before continuing. She said that 10 years had taught her that Efia's hatred was never truly about her. It was about Efia's own fear, her pain, and the insecurities she never let anyone help her carry. She said Efia was simply the mirror she could not stand to look into. Efia sank to her knees in the dust, sobbing openly now, 10 years of buried guilt finally breaking loose like water bursting through a long cracked dam. Adwoa said she forgave her, not because she had earned it, but because she had carried this pain long enough, and she deserved peace more than she deserved to keep punishing her. She knelt down in the dirt beside her sister, the same dirt she had once walked away through in shame, and wrapped her arms around her. Efia clung to her, shaking, whispering apologies that no longer needed to be spoken, because forgiveness, once truly given, does not require endless repetition to be real. It was Ma'akua's frail voice that broke the heavy silence, a sound Adwoa had ached to hear for 10 long years. The old woman called out that her daughter had come home, pushing through the crowd with strength she had not shown in years, tears streaming freely down her weathered face. Adwoa rose and rushed to her mother, catching her thin frame in an embrace that seemed to hold within it every single day they had lost. Ma'akua had grown smaller with age, her hands more fragile, but her love had not diminished by a single degree in 10 years of waiting. She whispered that she never stopped believing in her daughter, that every single evening she sat by that road, waiting to see if today would be the day she returned. Adwoa whispered back that she felt her love reaching her, even from so far away, and that it was what kept her alive. The crowd that had once condemned her now stood in stunned, humbled silence, witnessing not a moment of triumph over them, but something far more powerful, a family choosing love over the wreckage of injustice. Adwoa did not return to seek punishment for the village that had wronged her. She had already built an empire without their help. She needed nothing from them now but the truth, and she had received it. Instead, she chose to build something that would outlast every grudge, every lie, every year of pain. She purchased the land beside the old baobab tree, the very place where she had once been condemned, and built a school. Not a small one, but a proper building with real desks, real books, and real teachers brought in from the city. She named it after her mother, Ma'akua Academy, and its doors were open to every child in the village, regardless of their family's wealth, reputation, or standing. She established a scholarship in Ama's name for young women from difficult backgrounds who wanted to learn business, just as she once had, taught by a stranger who saw worth in her when no one else did. And she offered Efia a place, not out of pity, but out of genuine belief that people can change when given the chance to prove it. Efia became the school's administrator, pouring the years of guilt she carried into something finally, truly constructive. It did not erase what she had done, but it gave her a way to spend the rest of her life building instead of destroying. Standing before the villagers gathered for the school's opening ceremony, Adwoa spoke the words her mother had given her so many years before, beneath a very different mango tree, in a very different lifetime. She reminded them that her mother once told her that the world would try to dim her light, but she should never stop shining. She said that even when she was cast into darkness, she never let that light go out. Because the truth is, the light inside us is not given by the people around us. It is born within, and no one, no matter how cruel, can take it from you unless you allow them to. She looked out over the crowd, the elders who had once condemned her, the children who would now have opportunities she never had, and her sister, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering with tears in her eyes. She said she did not come back for revenge. She came back to prove that kindness, patience, and forgiveness are not weaknesses. They are the strongest weapons any of us will ever carry. And she came back to turn a village that once knew only hatred into a village that finally understands hope. Every story carries a lesson if we are willing to sit with it long enough to learn. Adwoa's story teaches us that no matter how many times life pushes us down into the dust, we carry within us the power to rise again, not through bitterness, but through quiet, relentless strength. The people who hurt us do not get to define our futures. Only our own choices hold that power. Efia's story teaches us something equally important, that jealousy, left unchecked, does not destroy only its target. It destroys the one who carries it, slowly, from the inside, until guilt becomes a prison far crueler than any punishment others could hand down. And Ma'akua's story reminds us that love, real love, does not require proof or presence to remain unbroken. A mother's faith can survive 10 years of silence and still burn as bright as the day her daughter walked away. Adwoa chose forgiveness not because her sister deserved it, but because she herself deserved peace. And in choosing that path, she discovered something far more valuable than any revenge could have given her. She discovered freedom. If you are carrying anger tonight, jealousy that has followed you for years, or bitterness that has quietly poisoned your own peace, let this story be your reminder. Holding on to those things does not punish the person who wronged you. It only continues to punish you. Let it go. Forgive, not for them, but for yourself, and build something beautiful from whatever pieces remain. Just like Adwoa did, every story has a lesson. This was hers. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Afrok-Drama Diaries for more stories that will make you think, feel, and remember what truly matters. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell us in the comments, have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you deeply? We read every single comment. See you in the next story.